Welcome to This Explainer. We're diving straight into Julian Huxley's absolute game changer of an achievement, the modern synthesis. If you've ever wondered how the invisible microscopic world of genetics perfectly connects to the vast diversity of life on Earth, and eventually right up to human culture itself, well, you're absolutely in the right place. We're going to see exactly how Huxley paved the way for our modern understanding of evolution, proving that every single factor from tiny molecules to complex human traditions is part of one giant interconnected complex.
But to really appreciate this, we got to go back to the early 20th century. Biology was, honestly, in a full-blown crisis. You had different fields operating in complete silos. Paleontologists were digging up fossils, geneticists were breeding fruit flies, naturalists were out observing the environment, and no one was talking to each other. As Julian Huxley perfectly put it in 1942, the science desperately needed a concerted attack and synthesis.
So, how exactly did we get there? How did scientists take this fractured, messy science and forge a unified theory of life? We have to ask ourselves how they managed to connect the invisible world of microscopic genes all the way up to the grand, sweeping scale of human culture. To track this incredible shift, here's our roadmap. 1. The eclipse of Darwinism. 2. The modern synthesis. 3. Mutations and the gene complex. 4. The multiformatity of life. And finally, 5. The leap from biology to culture. All right, let's kick things off with part 1, the eclipse of Darwinism, a time when the science was completely divided. At the turn of the 20th century, you essentially had two rival camps that were practically at war. On one side, the early Mendelians in the lab studying genetics. They believed evolution happened in sudden, discontinuous jumps driven by massive mutations. On the flip side, the classical Darwinians out in the wild argued that evolution was all about continuous, gradual change driven by natural selection. They were looking at the exact same puzzle, but both sides were stubbornly insisting that their piece was the only one that mattered. That brings us to section 2, the modern synthesis, and how this puzzle was finally put together. Enter Julian Huxley. He stepped in as this visionary unifier and essentially forged a massive scientific truce. He pulled together genetics, paleontology, ecology, systematics, and even mathematical analysis into one cohesive picture. He was the one who finally showed that, hey, those small, discrete mutations the geneticists are obsessed with, when they accumulate and natural selection acts on them, they produce the exact, broad, continuous trends the paleontologists are finding out in the dirt. The big takeaway here is that evolution is a joint product. It's mutation plus recombination plus selection. Huxley made it crystal clear that neither mutation nor selection acts alone. Their interplay is as indispensable to evolution as hydrogen and oxygen are to water. Mutation provides the raw variations, recombination shuffles the deck, and natural selection is the guiding force deciding which patterns survive. You simply can't have evolution without the whole shebang working together. Moving right along to section 3, mutations and the gene complex, the microscopic raw material of life. So, mutations are the fundamental building blocks of evolution. But, and this is a big but, as Huxley pointed out, they're really just preliminary offers made to the organism. By themselves, mutations are totally random. They don't have a goal. They're just a biological suggestion, basically saying, hey, what if we try this? And then that suggestion has to be tested out in the real world. Now, if a mutation gives us the raw hereditary material, sexual reproduction enables recombination, which basically juggles those existing genes around. This process is absolutely essential for rapid adaptation. It's exactly why sexual reproduction is so incredibly common in nature. It allows an organism to rapidly combine the best, most favorable traits from different individuals, giving the whole species a massive boost in evolutionary flexibility. Okay, this part is fascinating. Before Huxley's synthesis, folks kind of thought a mutation just had a single fixed effect, good or bad, end of story. But Huxley championed this concept of the gene complex. It's the idea that the rest of an organism's genetic makeup acts as this delicate, buffering ecosystem. A mutation doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It interacts with thousands of other genes. So the existing gene complex can actually adjust itself over time to turn a mutation that might initially be harmful into something highly beneficial. Talk about a game changer. All right, on to section 4, the multiformity of evolution, where we scale things up to nature.
When we scale up from invisible molecules to whole populations, the sheer size of a group drastically changes the mathematical rules of how it evolves. In a small, rare population, evolution can be driven by pure dumb luck. You get accidental drift, which can lock useless or even harmful traits into the species. But as populations get larger and more abundant, natural selection becomes incredibly steady, and variability absolutely maxes out. And that's exactly why abundant species have a massive evolutionary advantage when it comes to long-term survival. Because they have this huge reservoir of inheritable variation, they have way greater evolutionary plasticity. They're divided into these vast continuous subgroups that are constantly interbreeding, constantly testing out new genetic combinations against whatever the environment throws at them.
And all this vast variation ultimately leads to the creation of entirely new species. Geographical speciation is pretty easy to picture, right? A river or a glacier separates a population, and over millions of years they drift apart genetically. But ecological speciation is just as crucial. You could have two groups of the exact same species living in the exact same forest, but if one starts eating a different plant or maybe breeding at a different time of year, they can diverge into entirely separate species without any physical barrier at all. No mountains required.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, From Biology to Culture, the Absolute Pinnacle of Progress. True evolutionary progress isn't just about surviving. Survival is just the baseline. Progress, in a biological sense, is about gaining independence from a wildly fluctuating environment. It's about raising your biological efficiency. Think about it. A warm-blooded animal is far more independent of the weather than a cold-blooded one. Gaining that control over the environment is the defining metric of evolutionary advancement. You can map out the major necessary steps of this biological progress that paved the way for us. From the very first combination of cells, to the evolution of a head and a centralized brain, to warm-bloodedness, and finally, all the way to conceptual thought and speech. Every single one of these steps provided a massive leap in independence from the outside world. Which brings us to a really profound realization. For humanity, evolution has shifted almost entirely away from slow genetic changes. The major biological innovations, they're largely behind us. We are the latest dominant type on Earth, sure, but our ongoing progress no longer relies on waiting around for a lucky genetic mutation. It hangs entirely on our minds, on our capacity for conceptual thought. Our tradition and culture provide this incredibly fast, flexible substitute for the agonizingly slow genetic changes we see in the rest of nature. While other animals literally have to wait hundreds of thousands of years for mutation to give them thicker fur for the cold, humans can just invent a coat or build a fire. Cultural transmission lets us pass down survival mechanisms instantly from one generation to the next, entirely bypassing that microscopic machinery of genetic mutation. As Huxley beautifully summarized it, man alone in the universe is not finished. While biological progress might have plateaued for other species, humanity's journey has really just begun. Through culture, tradition, and science, we've stepped right outside the traditional bounds of Darwinian natural selection. We've literally taken the reins of our own evolution. So here's the big question to leave you with. Now that evolution has officially handed the baton over to human culture, where do we direct our own evolutionary progress? Because we aren't waiting for nature to shape us anymore. We are the architects of our own progress. And whether we like it or not, we're the caretakers of the environments that shape every other surviving species on this planet. What exactly are we going to build with this unprecedented control?
Thank you so much for exploring the modern synthesis with us in this explainer. I hope this helps you see how every single piece of life, from the smallest mutating gene to the most complex human tradition, is all part of one deeply interconnected story. Keep questioning the world around you, and as always, keep learning.